Dhruti Shah, welcome to the Society of Environmental Authors and Journalists podcast, representing the members and speaking to and on behalf of the members. So this is exciting first for us and I guess for you a little bit. So welcome, and just tell us your story. What is Dhruti all about? What is it that you do?
Thank you, Steve, for having me. I am quite excited about this. It's such a brilliant organization, and what you're doing is something that I'm really proud to be on the journey alongside with you all as well. In terms of what do I do, I have a lot of fingers in lots of pies. So sometimes it's very hard to figure out what is my story. So I appreciate you giving me this opportunity because I'll probably be navigating it as we talk. And then you'll be responsible for my CV, etc., etc. But no, I come from the Jain faith, so I was brought up a Jain, and that is very integral to my practice with the environment and nature, because not everybody knows what Jainism is. It originated in Gujarat in India. There are lots of us all over the world, which is great when you're going on holiday, and then you can sort of stay with some other Jains. Um, but it's very much about having a respectful attitude relationship with nature. So before it was very fashionable and sexy to be vegetarian, vegan, this was something that I was brought up with. So I've never eaten meat my entire life, because it's about uh, we think about causing harm to animals and that they are sentient beings, which there's a lot of conversations around nowadays. But when you're, you know, I'm now in my mid 40s, but 40 years earlier, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm such a weirdo. No one else is a Jane, like apart from the community that you're in.
Mm.
You're like, I want to go and hang out at McDonald's and like we have a McDonald's party. And yeah, I can't because, there's no capacity for me. I mean, and other organizations, but when you're a kid and you just want to belong and be part of things. But at the same time, I was very lucky, we have one festival every year called Pujasan, and there you don't eat any root vegetables. So again, it's about having that relationship with nature and having it applicable. But my whole thing isn't, it's not just about faith. It's just something that is very inherent in the way that I've been brought up and the way that I approach my life now. Understanding that if you're pulling something out of the ground, that, we would be like, they can talk. And now there's a lot of science, right, around the
Mm.
fact that these vegetables, these trees, that these, mushrooms, mycelia, that they are having conversations with each other. So it's having that holistic relationship with nature. That's what I was brought up with. However, at the same time, and I think again this is very important, I wouldn't say that I've got an, very ethereal relationship with nature. I don't. In fact, I have real envy over people who do, who are like, yes, as soon as I go outside, I'm at one with nature. I'm not. I'm really scared of things. I have a very clumsy relationship with nature. Like I'm likely to get thorns in me because I'll get too close to the rose bushes because I don't know how to navigate that because I'm not an insect. I don't know. Or I'm scared of slugs. I don't understand slugs, and I have a healthy respect for people that study slugs. I don't get them. You know, I lived in the suburbs for a very long time. For a very long time. In fact, I'm still in suburbia, and let's face it, it's not very environment friendly. You've got cars. You like growing up in spaces where if you go outside, you've got to be very careful because we're now in very much like don't go outside, you might get kidnapped. And I'm not even joking, but it's not like I think it used to be where I'm not all nostalgia, but we're in a very sort of risk averse times, and that's been getting more and more stronger in the way that people are approaching things. People, they don't walk to school nowadays because oh, bad things can happen, and I think that's sad in a way because it means that you risk losing connection with the world around you. I really wish, and I'm sure there are members who are really good at this, and I have got professional envy and normal envy over it. I wish I could identify the trees that are around us. I wish I could do that, but I can't. And even now, when I try and figure out, I'm like, oh, what I know what an acorn, I know, I know what an oak tree is, but why don't I know the others? Why is it that we're not taught that in schools? And I know that, there are conversations around nature, natural environment, GCSEs. So my relationship with the environment is a really awkward one. As I said, there is that element of being brought up in a faith that has an environmental background, but there's also that element of being brought up in urban environments and not always having access. And one other thing that I'll bring in, and we can go much deeper into these because I did end up writing about these things, is that when you come from immigrant communities in the UK, and I know there's a lot of conversation around immigration now, sometimes you don't always go to the environment, to the outdoors in the UK. Or, we didn't always, because it wasn't necessarily considered to be a space where uh, many of us thought that we belonged, or that's not our area. We stay in these spaces, and that's not necessarily a good thing at all. But there are certainly lots of conversations happening around that now, around who gets access to environmental spaces, to the outdoors, to the countryside, to national, to properties which are outside. Um, Very eloquent. I'm a much better writer than I am a broadcaster. Um, and that's something I actually ended up writing about for the Washington Post. So, can I just say you can aim big when you have a nugget of an idea, bearing in mind who the audience is. Um, Belonging, I write a lot about belonging, and that comes into my spaces. I'm like, oh yeah, when I was a kid, we used to go out and have these like picnics with the rest of our family. We go on these coach trips, but it would be us as our brown community together. And it's like, well, hold on a minute, why is it that I was only having access to mixed communities when I was at school? And again, can the schools afford to go out into the outdoors, because schools have challenges around funding? So my background is very much like, I'm doing a lot of hindsight thinking nowadays in terms of my relationship with nature, and how and the environment, and how I move forwards. Why is it that if we go to Kenya, we've been talking about Kenya, where my family has heritage, that it's really comfortable to be like, let's go into the Masai Mara, or let's go and go outside, or you walk and you've got, say, dogs or whatever, they're alongside us. But in the UK, there's a slightly different attitude. Like, I don't know. And so these are sort of spaces that I'm bringing my environmental thinking into. Um, but yeah, I basically, again, I'll try and be more succinct now. I am a neurodivergent South Asian woman who always wanted to be a journalist since I was a kid. My whole life was geared towards doing that. I'm now in this space of having a midlife career shift, thinking, what is there beyond my pure journalistic instinct when it comes to storytelling? Because the industry itself is in strange situations. And I bring the nature into that. It's very much a rooting space. When I was doing pure journalism in news spaces, I used to do a lot of social media news gathering, which meant that I was doing a lot of brain work. And unfortunately, that led to some traumatic situations where I was exposed to some of the nasty things that happen on social media spaces. But that, again, that mental health element brought me back to nature, if I'm honest with you. I remember talking to one of my friends, Ginny Reddy, who is an amazing nature writer, and she said to me, "Go outside, go barefoot." And I was like, "What about the worms?" She goes, "Go barefoot and put your feet on the grass." And that's a real brilliant rooting technique. So for people that are doing that sort of social digital news gathering, which many of us end up doing because you don't always get to go out in the field, um, having access to these nature spaces, I do think are really important to factor in. And yeah, and that's how I started building a relationship with the environment, with the world around me, and being like, let's build more of a connect between things that I've been learning through my faith, things that I'm doing with my mental health, and what's there. And I'll give one more, and then you really should ask some questions because I could talk forever. I was having therapy because of the nasty things that I was looking at and working with, in news gathering. So just think of the worst things, try not to, that you could be doing. And I ended up actually going to go and work in a different part of the organization I was with. So at that point, I was working as a BBC journalist. And I went to go work for the business unit. And I had this epiphany, which really made me embrace the relationship between storytelling and nature, from perfectly frank with you. It was a real catalyst moment, and has led to where I am now and me joining the society. In that, I do not have a business background. I was working in a business unit, and there was a morning meeting, and they were all these super clever people, and they were talking about, and this was just before Brexit had happened. Philip Hammond, who was the chancellor at the time, is a hawk. Oh, why are we talking about hawks? And I'd come there for digital storytelling purposes. That was my area of expertise. And then it was like, at that point, Facebook is a unicorn. Oh, why are we bringing in unicorns here? And then I was like, oh, hold on a minute. For someone who doesn't have that investment background, or banking background, what I do have is storytelling. And for those allegories, for those metaphors, for those representatives of animals to be coming into these spaces, maybe there's something there. And so I asked around, and it turns out that there are a lot of animals in the business world, a heck lot of animals. Like none of these I've made up. So luckily, because I have this background in verification and I love a bit of research and digging, I just used that as a playful project while also doing the job. And we ended up doing an and I got an illustrator on board because I think it's important to understand that people have different skill sets. So while I can draw and I'm okay, in this particular project, I wanted to bring someone who was able to make meme worthy images, so it would appeal to a wide audience. It's come from social news gathering, but also something fun that if economists had a look at the project I was doing, they'd also get something out of it, rather than me like, oh, I know all this already. But it'd also go to schools and to kids who'd be like, oh, let's look at a bear market. What's a bear market? Oh, we've got a bear going to the market. What's a vulture investor? And then you've got this vulture who's dressed up on top of a desk, I think it is, that we ended up landing on. But do you know what I mean? So I was like, oh, there's animals, and I realized that there's such power in nature and how we understand and navigate the world. And so I ended up pulling together an A to Z, and then I realized there's probably a book in it. And I broke all the rules of convention, by the way. So I don't know how you're supposed to get a book deal normally because I didn't do what you're supposed to do. I wrote to like 100 publishers thinking, oh, you just contact the publisher direct. I wrote to literary agents. They told me to come back with something more conventional because it was very hard for people to understand what I wanted to do. And I wanted to create a nature-based financial literacy book that was suitable for uh, families so that they could talk about business and be exposed to business when they're at home, for schools, libraries, so that it would tap into financial literacy, but also for people who knew that what they were doing and further along in their journey. That's not how people want things. They want things for a specific audience, very straight laced. And when you're bringing two weird things together, nature and financial literacy, not everyone's necessarily going to believe in you, but I believed in it. So anyway, so I wrote to like 100 representatives in publishing, and I just got complete rejections. It was like, well, this is no, 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 no. But I think when you believe in something and you understand, and it was clearly, I didn't make any of these up. Like, red herrings, that exists and we use that in common parlance. As I said, if you're not using a bear market every day, that's absolutely fine. But you're talking about cash cows. There's maniko nekos, which are they're actually Japanese, but the little cat with the waving paw. So all of these are surrounding us on a regular basis, and they all turn up in money and finance. So I knew that there was something in it, and I also had faith in myself, that my weird idea would come to something. And and also I was very lucky in that my family, my nephew at that point was just like, what about this book deal? Have you tried this? What about this publisher? So having that support really makes you think I've got to do something. And eventually I got a book deal, like literally. So no agent, but we did something a bit naughty. I'm not gonna say everyone should do this. The illustrator I worked with, his name's Dominic Bailey. He's still at the BBC. We I was still at the BBC at that point, by the way. We created a prototype and then put it in a first class like recorded delivery letter as if it was something super important in order to try and bypass the slush pile because I worked in publishing, done some work experience when I was at uni. And I'm not saying everyone can do that, by the way, but I'm just saying it worked for me. And so as soon as it came out, people were like, oh, they could see it for themselves instead of me trying to pitch empty to people that didn't know who the heck I was. And then so they saw like a visual, here's some funny words because I can write funnily. I can write I'm a writer, I promise. I can write wittily when I need to. Some funny words introducing you to these concepts, and here's some wonderful illustrations. You know, and they were like, we can do something with this. But then the pandemic happened, and I was like, oh no. But I hope you get a sense of me that when I really have my head focused on something, like I pull through and I get it done. And so I was like, screw this. Sorry, I was like, I will get this into the space it needs to be. And we made sure that our book didn't get, disbanded. There were obstacles. The London Book Fair was going on, it wasn't going on. There were a lot of book fairs that got cancelled, but we created our own front cover. That's also not normal. And we created a best tree of business terms and we got it out there and it became a bestseller. And Michael Rosen put it on his list of books to make you think. David Attenborough wrote us a letter. So when you really believe in something in the field that we're in, and you know that nature can connect, you should really push for it. And that was a real valuable learning curve for me because, like I said, I wasn't a famous author. I'm not a famous author. I wasn't a business expert, but I really believe that what we were creating was a really helpful and important educational tool. And I would hope again that's how people see that I think. So the book I now take everywhere. I use it as my calling card. I got into the hands of Shonda Rhimes not so long ago,
All
who's
right.
the creator of Grey's Anatomy. So by the way, also if you are an author, which many of us clearly are in this listening to this podcast, be shameless because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to have to take ownership of something that you've put a lot of your heart and soul into. So if it is something that can fit in your pocket, always worth pursuing. Keep it in your pocket and use it as your calling card because that's what I do. Like I said, it's gone to Shonda Rhimes, it's gone to Dion. We tried to get a copy to Dion Warwick, people that you wouldn't necessarily expect, but potentially are interested in it. It's gone to schools, and I think for me, that's one of the most important things that we're able to get 6-year-olds talking about bear markets. They don't have to know the ins and outs of the concepts, but they're not scared of the language. And I think that's something that is actually very important for us as journalists and authors in this sphere, that we're not using language that becomes exclusive purely for us. And I think in the nature world, sometimes you can have that. Um, and then basically I realized that actually nature and environmental writing wasn't something that wasn't for me. It was something that I could incorporate within my tableau of work. And, I ended up doing a lot more nature writing and taking ownership of the pieces that I had already. So that meant that, I'd gone walking with wolf dogs in Colorado, and I'm like, that's environmental writing because the wolf dogs are all about the rewilding debate that was happening in Colorado across the US at that point. I'd managed to persuade my the again it was in the US for a little bit, not now. The one where they have a massive repository of where all like the dead trafficked animals go, like the
Okay.
wildlife trafficking. So like the stuffed creatures, which I don't condone that at all. There's one place in the US where they have it. It's absolutely amazing. So I got to visit that. And then next door, it's where all the dead see a common theme around death. There's where all the dead eagles go. So the eagles in the US are federally protected, or they were definitely at that point. And not a lot of people realized that there was a relationship between the US government, again at that point, so this is back in 2019, and the where the the eagles, which are a very sort of a potent symbol, they would be processed because some of the body, the parts of the animal were of spiritual significance to Native American communities. And so, you're like, oh, well, hold on a minute, that's environmental writing. So going back in the archives, and I had this obsession with wolves, and I would always try and get at least one wolf story out in the BBC. And I'm like, hold on a minute, that's environmental stuff that I was doing. So again, a lot of it is about taking ownership. And then as a freelancer, so I ended up disembarking, and I've been trying to navigate my own pathway as a freelancer since. So that's during the pandemic. Um, I have been very lucky that I've collaborated with Climate Reframe. So I got a very strange email into my inbox. I didn't know who they were at the time saying, "Hello, Dhruti, we've heard about you." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, who are these people?" But this clearly works. Are you free next week? Would you like to come and talk about? Would you like to come and listen to nightingales in an interspecies concert while also talking about migration? So, like the migration patterns of the birds, but also we as immigrants and that space of belonging. And I was like, I don't know who these people are. I did some verification checks, and I'm like, but this sounds weird and fun and amazing. And then I was able to pitch that to the Washington Post. So I ended up writing this piece about going to listen to nightingales in Sussex with loads of other people of color that had not all of us had gone camping before and knew each other. And then again, that then led to a trail of other things where I ended up speaking at an event at the Timber Festival, which sadly is now defunct. I went camping for the first time. At that point, I just received my autism diagnosis. So I ended up pitching to adventure.com. I'd not written for them before about being autistic, having anxiety, and also going camping for the first time at an outdoor festival. I did get locked in and out of the tent, so it became a comedy piece. But again, that's that relationship with the outdoors. I do think I go to All the Elements, which is again an amazing organization, opening up the outdoors to many different people. So people from lower socioeconomic capabilities, people who are disabled, people who are from different heritages, but bringing them together in different community spaces so that they can build a relationship with the outdoors, because no one should be excluded. I ended up hosting a panel at the Ignite Climate Summit. Oh no, sorry, not that. At the TV Foundation, yeah, was running a festival. So once you start having this journey, it clearly leads to other spaces. But I'm going to stop now because I could really like talk forever on this.
Well, you have too much interesting stuff to talk about, and that's the beauty of the interface between writing and the environment. As you've been talking, obviously the definition of environment just gets bigger and bigger. And not a lot of people, well, I was going to say not a lot of people realize, most people seem to forget that we are part of nature. We're just a creature like wolves are. It's just that we happen to be consciously mischievous rather more than many others like zebras or slugs. So, and there's a paradox that occurred to me. You mentioned Kenya earlier on. I have some connections with Kenya, as I mentioned to you. And like you're saying, suburbia kind of protects you from these weird parts of nature. What I see in other parts of the world, and Kenya is a good example, is that people want to get out of nature and get into the comforts of the cities, because that's where you make the money, that's where you get the cars and the nice houses and all those lions and tigers and elephants that eat your crops. Phew, we've escaped from all of that. And that's a real paradox when it comes to conservation, because humanity doesn't seem to intuitively value it.
I think you're completely right. Like we don't have that holistic relationship. And I don't understand where it's got lost. Maybe it's in the
Yeah.
teaching, maybe it's in the
Mm.
education, maybe it's in the fact that yes, there is this distinction between urban and rural, when in fact everything, you look at the history of the spaces that, in fact, I was looking back at some old maps. They came up on TikTok
Mhm.
of Uxbridge, which is where I grew up. And I'm like, oh, well, hold on a minute. So the river, the floodplain is here and the river ran through this. And that's why we can't build. Well, we shouldn't build here because actually the stream, where the river will run off, there's still a stream underneath where, very, very, very deep down, but it's still relevant. And when it's a shame that there is that massive disconnect.
Mhm.
A lot. I remember I can't give the stats now, and I would be loath to, but it's definitely there. Kids don't know where the food comes from, and we're in times of food security, and we're heading further and further into those times. And yet there's a disconnect between, the animals that some people eat. I don't, but also what the the crops, for example, right now. So climate change, which does exist, climate change that is affecting supply, that affects supply chains, which means we're not getting we're not getting food stuff into the UK. I'm going to give one example. So I come from an Asian family and we love mangoes.
Mhm.
Like mango season is like a real highlight of the year. And I mean that's not just with Asian families, but clearly for us it's growing up. But you have to understand that mangoes, they come from overseas at the moment. We're not currently in that situation where mangoes can be grown in the UK. They probably will be at some point, but not right now. And it's like when they don't come, there are two spaces. You've got the Asian communities, but then you also have the very, very, very rich restaurants which get affected. And you're like, oh, hold on a minute. That's not a far away problem just because it's not mango season now. That's a here problem. That's something that's affecting us right now. I used to get made fun of because I also always used to be like, I love supply chains. Like Bloomberg, fair play. Actually, Bloomberg does a supply chain newsletter. They're the only people I think that they do. I can't actually afford it anymore. I used to be able to, but I can't. So if anyone ever wants to sort of sponsor me the Bloomberg newsletter, but they do on a supply chains, and I really think that a lot of the other news organizations or slower news organizations are missing out on a trick there because supply chains feed into everything, and that includes the environment.
Mm.
Where where whether it's foodstuffs or whether the relationship that we have, where the flowers come from. If people, say someone's getting married and they want live flowers, fresh flowers, where are those flowers coming from? How do those flowers get there? Everything can be applied to our day-to-day life, and yet, say there is a big disconnect. And the question is, well, one of the questions I think is, what can we do? Those who are already in these journeys, and we're all different spaces. What can we do to try and create a more holistic view of our relationship with nature? I'm actually going to give a shout out at the moment. So I've actually just written a book. Written a book. I wish no, I haven't. I've just read a book by a woman called Dr. Anjana Katwa. It's called The Whispers of Rock. I've written a review for another organization, so I'm just waiting for that to come out at the moment. But it's the first time I'd actually read a book without giving too much away. Um, where she's made me look at pavements in a completely different way. So she's obsessed, and I think it would be fair to say this woman is obsessed, geology, geography, like rocks. The book is a love letter. And when you read it, you've got this holistic view of like of indigenous communities across the world and their relationship with rocks and also pavements. Like I've never looked at a pavement with such, I'm not gonna say awe, but such wonder
Mhm.
until I read until I read this book and seen the passion. And she's on Instagram, TikTok, the passion that this woman has for the relationship that we have with rocks. And I think if we get more people who have that weird, geeky,
Mhm.
nerdy passion, that one bit of the environment that they're into, that's fine.
Mhm.
Get them out there, bring them in as communicators, because maybe then together we can build a much stronger, much more resilient community that has a better relationship with nature and the environment in which we live.
I find it really interesting as writers. I think writing is partly a coping mechanism, but it's also a passion and a mission to alert people to what's going on in all these senses as well, isn't it? And I think that's a very valuable thing to be doing and contributing to society. But throughout not only our membership, but people who are aware of these kind of topics, it gives me much greater faith in humanity and hope that you avoid all of the clickbait headlines of the nonsensical politics, and there's this parallel world which is actually full of joy and hope, completely different from what you think the mainstream media is feeding us.
I think you're right. I mean, I was just going to use because you end up not. It's very hard not to do it. It's like, oh, they're canaries, because we end up using these animals constantly in the language. It's a real rabbit hole. But yes, canaries. But I've just written some poetry actually. I saw a call out. So this is where social media can be helpful, like especially as writers, because but again, it's being in the right spaces. Is I saw this call out from somebody who is I think they're trying to create an anthology actually, and it was about weeds. And it's like, what is the role of, and that's what it was. What is the role of weeds? And I thought, oh, do you know what? I don't know nothing about weeds. So I'm actually going to turn to brief here. And so I looked and I investigated into weeds. And the more I learn about weeds, I'm like, oh, wow. Like weeds are just like flowers or plants
Mm,
in a different space.
mm,
Like put them somewhere else, then maybe they'd be celebrated rather than considered a pain or a problematic. And I think that is one of the challenges that we have, and also the very hopeful spaces. Actually, when you look at
mm,
the language around weeds, it's really interesting. There's a lot of like, there's fairy tales, there's stories to be read around, shepherds. I say shepherds purses that weed. I get told off by a weed specialist. There are definite stories that we're missing out on, where these plants have been used in folklore, in building a relationship with the natural world. That perhaps some of them are helpful. You can get nettle tea, right? But
mm,
not everybody realizes that. I mean, make sure you get the right nettles. Um, and it's a real shame, because I think a lot of it is around language, and and I do
mm,
think there is a lot of hope. So you can see weeds and be like, oh, that's something negative, but in that space of negativity, actually, weeds are really hopeful. Weeds grow when nothing else can grow necessarily. You're walking in the pavement. Go back to pavements. This is what happens when you read you read a book, and they're growing through the cracks. That is miraculous. So when nothing is able to grow, you're seeing this weed come through. And if we reframe the way we think, we're like, oh, hold on a minute. But if life's all rubbish at the moment, it's not working out, and that does happen, you're like, the weed's able to do it, and so what's going on there? And that is a reframe, right? So
mm,
I think you're completely right, and we do have that power as writers and communicators in order to engage in these spaces of reframe and positivity, even when there's a lot of worry and think what's the language used? Climate trauma, climate anxiety
mm,
right now. But the more we engage in conversations where we're talking about open dialogue, where we're using language that acknowledges indigenous communities and acknowledges, British, medieval language, even, it acknowledges the language that we use, then there is definitely a space for hope.
There's it makes me also think that hunter gathering, you might not favor the hunting bit, but the gathering, when you probably don't go out in the countryside as we do where I live in North Nottinghamshire. collecting crab apples and blackberries and damsons, and this is the season of what they call it, mellow fruitfulness. We've got kitchens full of stuff that's been harvested from nature. And even you mentioned your own faith, but people use the word pagan as if it's something to be avoided, and yet it only means people of the countryside who had a direct relationship with Mother Nature, and that was the faith because we depended on it. And it seems like the narrative places a positive value on moving away from all of that, whereas in reality, we depended on it.
You're completely right. And that's the thing, if you bring every faith in, whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Judaism, whether Sikhism, and Zoroastrianism, actually, if you look at them, and I'm not going to say I'm not again not a faith expert, but for those who have tenets of faith, I'm actually bringing in secular people. Nature is in everything. It's
Yeah.
in every story going. It's in every element. Every tenant, like whatever books that are used for teachings. Again, we do bring paganism in, which is like, oh no, that's an antithesis. But the thing is, nature is always there. Nature is permanent. Nature is what makes us alive,
Yeah, precisely
and
so.
therefore it has to, yeah, that's the thing, it has to feed into, again, see the language feeding, it has to feed into these conversations. So there is not a single faith space or secular space that can be disparate, disconnected from nature. It's just impossible. I actually do have envy when you're like, I was going out collecting this. I'm like, I wish I even knew whether this was poisonous or not. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wish I even knew. Like, I remember walking with somebody once, and he said to me, he goes, "Don't pick the low berries because all the dogs, the dogs have been sniffing around them." And I was like, I wouldn't even consider that at all. Like, do you know what I mean? I'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And even now, in uh in my actually it's my parents' garden. In my parents' garden, um, we've thrown like this is how bad I am at nature. We've thrown like a tomato in, like just being like, oh, let's just put one in and dig it in and see what happens, even though we're having like this slight hoo-ha with the foxes, but it's fine because foxes are fine except when they're cattle. Um, we put this tomato in. It's gone mad. Like honestly, I've never seen, and we didn't do anything. Do you know what I mean? The tomatoes have just grown, and then my dad was like, "Oh, we've got what you got to do is take them when they're green, put them in a box, and then wait for them to go red." And I'm like, "Yeah, I knew that. I didn't know that." Do you know what I mean? I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, and that's my dad using stuff, that's what he's used to. I mean, this man used to go and climb up trees in Kenya to not anymore because he's much older and not able to do that. But they'd go out and climb trees to go and get some food. I really wish that I had that capability. Like, but I still have that degree of fear. What if I get the wrong thing? What if mushrooms? What if we pick the wrong one? And yes, you've got to be very careful around things like mushrooms. But I do have that envy when you said we go out and do this. And I'm like, we don't have that where I am. Do you know what I mean? Like you're like, we really don't have that. And then you have these worries. You're like, if you do get that, you're going to get sued. And that's really bad. That's that sort of, thinking that goes in these spaces of environment is that the element of fear, and we need more community building. We need more community discussions. We need less fear. We need to understand that we're all, I'm going to use a platitude here, but we're all in this together. And I really and I feel like going to come and visit you, Steve. You're like, are you? And I'm like, yes, to come and understand how to come and do, pick the right things, the right plants.
Well,
But this is the thing. I was gonna say in these urban areas, and it is sad where you do have people complaining because say a neighbour's got an apple tree or a cherry tree. So cherry trees are always quite interesting, and it's like, oh, but they're all going into my garden. I don't want to have that. I don't want to have to deal with that. And so that means people are like, I don't want to deal with the stress of the neighbour, just cut down the tree. I don't want to have to deal with the maintenance. It's expensive because it is expensive to actually maintain a tree, and that's a real shame that you have to factor in costs when it comes to having something that actually provides an abundance.
well, how do you think trees feel about the cost of us being around them?
Well, yeah, I do believe that trees feel. So it's like, well, what have you done? What have you done to the world? Although I did have a degree of hope I mean, I don't know if I'm sure you did see about the sycamore gap, the oak tree tip there. Now, National Trust has just announced that they're bringing artists in to try and sort of figure out, sort of next steps, which I do think art, we come from this writing world, art has a huge role to play when it comes to bridging that gap with nature and what we do to nature and where we have potential to to connect again.
Yeah, absolutely. And to create sanity that counterbalances the rubbish that's going on. So anyway, we could go on talking for a very long time, very clearly. So why don't we sort of think about winding up with you telling us a little bit more about what you're working on right now? How's your writing career? Where's the trajectory pointing you now?
Well, I'm having clearly challenges with things like ChatGPT in terms of the role that it plays, and it does also have an environmental cost. And I think it's important for us to factor in that these sort of generative AI situations, which do play a role in changing the way that our industry is, but also with the way that they operate, bearing in mind what it is that we're interested in around environment and nature. So I'm having dilemmas about how that operates because everyone's like, you've got to learn AI. And I do think, we do have to learn about AI tools. But at the same time, where are the conversations happening around those ethical implications? And who's factoring that in terms of where we are heading with our future. So, I'm part of the Pulitzer Center AI Accountability Network. So that's something I'm trying to figure out. I'm doing book reviews at the moment, which is great, except I don't know if anyone else is having this problem, but I'm hoping other people are. Like the older I get, or maybe again, it's just like the way that we're in these information overload times, it takes so much longer to read. So that's a bit like, oh, how do we figure that out? So I'm trying to do a bit more of that. I'm trying to get funding because actually to go out into the outdoors, especially when you're freelance, you've got to factor in these extra elements. So you have to say to commissioners, as well as the freelance industry itself is also in a strange space. You have to say, look, I believe that this is a story of interest because of XYZ, but I also have to factor in that if I want to even go outside, please can you factor in these costs and train costs etc are quite expensive. So I'm still trying to do freelancing. I've got some speaking gigs coming up, so I'm looking forward to that because clearly I know how to chat. um I'm shameless about bear markets and beyond and getting that out into the world because I do believe it's got long shelf life. A lot of the animals in bear markets, they've been around for a long time. The history of the piggy bank, for example. That comes from the way that the money banks were molded and then they became piggy banks. Um, so you'll hear me talk about piggy banks all the time. I have a podcast myself as well, which always has a climate specialist, environmental expert on. So in the past, it's had people who talk about corporate climate leadership, so very businessy, but then it's also had an interspecies diplomat. So again, going back to the conversation about relationships, and there was one individual who's looking at the relationship in Botswana between like cheetahs and elephants and herders. So I try and bring people in. It's called Have You Thought About to think differently. But I'm just trying to find personally a space where the things that I'm interested in, as I said, I think the concept of belonging really runs throughout everything, is is welcomed and celebrated because we are in some very strange times right now, where we need more open dialogue rather than closed dialogue. And we need to understand that as people, we can learn from each other about how to move forward in a world that really needs us to help it heal rather than, you know, get broken up. So yeah, I'm basically trying to navigate a pathway using my writing, but understanding that things really are shifting. So in the olden days, be like, I'm a writer, and I'm like, I'm not just a writer. I have a diverse portfolio, in order to keep using that storytelling to try and create change. So I wish I could give you a really simple one-liner, but I can't because it's just not the way that it works when you're an independent storyteller. I also have a newsletter because everybody does nowadays. So yeah, podcast will keep going, newsletter will keep going. We'll try and find spaces that are interested in the stories that are emerging. I do want to say one thing that I'm looking at now, and I do think maybe your audience will be interested in it because I'm going through the perimenopause stage, as it were, and whales go through menopause. So I know other people have researched that, but I do think there could be more to be done around that relationship between the environmental world and the shifts that people go through. So, as a woman, I'm going through perimenopause, but we're all going through different life shifts to to what our parents were going through. And I do think that nature um, has a role to play in how we navigate that. So right now, when I say to people, I'm a bit embarrassed to talk about this, but I want to talk about, do you take chemical hormones, or are there things that our parents, grandparents, people would have gone through before that they use in order to help them navigate these symptoms that nature is, that is a more natural remedy and can complement symptoms that are going through. I don't know. So that at the moment, if I'm honest with you, if anybody's doing that within the membership, please come and talk to me because it'd be useful to know. Nature is there for a reason, right? So why don't we learn from it?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I've learned is this recent trip I did was effectively tracing the history of essentially European civilization of the last 12,000 years from the far reaches of eastern Turkey. And the one thing I absolutely brought back from that is that society is never static. One group comes, another group comes. You look at the people who built this. Where did they go? They've vanished. Look at these people. Famous emperor comes and conquers. He vanishes. Another one comes and says, "No, I'm now the greatest." He vanishes. But nearly always he's that vanish. And so it's very comforting in one way that whatever stupidities are going on now, it will pass because another lot will come in who think they're the greatest. And similarly with your space and identity, nobody lives in the long scale of things in the place that their DNA originated from. Humanity is on the move continually. And so the idea that there is a lifetime when everything is static is not the truth. Look at it a little bit longer than a lifetime, and everything is constantly on the move. So finally, a shameless plug for your book in case some of the members haven't actually heard about it.
I appreciate that. So yes, it's called Bear Markets and Beyond: A Bestiary of Business Terms. And can say I'm very glad that we got bestiary in there because it is like, it is an animal reference book, and I don't think everyone always understands that. So we've got to have clear language, and it's nature-based. It's an illustrated nature-based guide to financial literacy and financial capability. Sounds very wordy, but basically you get to see some very, very pretty animals, get to read some very funny wording, and it means that you can pick it up. You don't have to read the whole thing through. Although it did win Short Business Book of the Year when it came out. So by the way, always, always commit to things if you really believe in them. Um, and it just helps you understand, what is a goose, what is a duck, what is a dragon bond, why there's so many cats in the business world. There are lots of cats and dogs. A nest egg. We're talking about nature here, right? Like we all want to build a nest egg, let's face it. A grey rhino. Why is it that the Chinese have included the grey rhino in their policies? So for someone who doesn't come from that business background, I would, if I'm doing this little plug, I'd say that anyone who's interested in nature, environment, or just wants to talk about it with their family, like this is a cute little gift book. It is illustrated, it is quite funny, and it's very cheap. It's less than 10 quid. Um, and the fact it's still got shelf life after coming out in 2020, I think it was, shows that it's making waves. So it's a slow burner, but hopefully it'll help you understand the world of business. And let's face it, money affects everything that we do.
Yeah, and help people face up to the next Black Swan event, which seems to come more and more.
Exactly, exactly.
Dhruti, thanks so much for this chat. It's been delightful hearing about it. I hope we'll be able to do another one at some point, but I'm sure it'll stimulate other members to come and tell their stories as well. So thanks a lot and wish you well in your next venture.
Thank you, Steve.